Hi everybody and welcome to Real Talk Divorce San Diego. I'm Shawn Skillin, one of two attorneys here on the panel today, and our co-host Lynn Waldman is taking the day off. So in her place we have Scott Weiner, who's a clinical psychologist and attorney. He has a practice up in Solana Beach here in San Diego area, and his phone number is 619-417-5743. Also, one of my regular co-hosts, Mark Hill from Pacific Divorce Management. His office is in Carmel Valley, and his number is 858-509-2320. And finally, our special guest today, Eric Billick from Fairway Mortgage. He is a certified divorce lending professional, and he's going to have a lot of information for us on refinancing the house or qualifying for a new loan. And again, he's with Fairway Mortgage, and his number is 760-476-3127. So today we're talking about the marital residence, kind of the ins and outs of what do you do with the house when you're going through a divorce. And we were going to start with you, Scott, and have you talk about all the emotional issues that are kind of tied up with the house. Are they important? What really influences decisions? All of that kind of stuff.
The house. In most marriages, the house is the largest asset, and financially, the issues are going to be covered by the other people here. But when we talk about what people feel when they're going through divorce, I mean, there's the leaver and the leavee often, and that can matter. There are tremendous amounts of fears and attachments that can go on as regards the house. People worry about the children. Do the children need to be allowed to stay in the residence, if that's at all possible? That's a question that these things vary, of course, between cases. There was Lynn Waldman, who is not here, happened to bring up that the house is considered the marital museum. It's full of memories, good and bad. People's attachment to staying in the house often involves things like old arguments, old disagreements, old attachments, and certainly old investments. When we wonder about the children, we wonder about how they actually feel about it, whether it really matters as much to them as people assume that it does. And people will often use arguments about how much it matters to buttress their side of their intent to either stay with the residents themselves or not. If I were to throw out an opinion, I would have to say that, having dealt with a lot of divorces, I think that the kids' issues are often not quite as strong in the long run as they seem or as they are reputed to be. And again, I think Lynn's quote was, home is where the parents are. So that's my little introduction to what I think about
Have you?
the emotional
I've
issues.
seen cases, Scott, where occasionally one of the parties will say, well, the children must have the house. They really want the house, but they've never asked the children, and the children have no voice in the process. So how do you address something like that from your standpoint?
I do a lot of work in what is called collaborative divorce, where we have a team of professionals, typically 2 attorneys, 2 coaches, a child specialist, a financial specialist, and sometimes a separate real estate specialist. And then the children really do get asked. Mm-hmm. Many times when cases go to court, in the sorts of lateral mediations that occur, the children are interviewed by somebody who is an ally of the court. It winds up getting addressed in a lot of different ways, and I would say that what the children feel often winds up following a fairly distant second to what the financial realities actually require.
I guess the question that people always have to me when I'm doing mediation or collaborative divorce is, how important is it really to keep the kids in the house? So, I mean, if it's just not possible financially, then obviously it's not going to happen.
That's right.
And you have to deal with telling the kids some of the hard realities of life. But assuming it is possible, one way or another, to keep them in the house, is that a really critical thing to do? Are the kids going to be messed up for life if you can't keep the house?
I would say that whether or not the kids are going to be messed up for life is probably not going to be that outcome isn't going to be determined by their real estate location. If you back away from this and you look at reality in California, people move all the time. You know, people move all the time. Housing is so expensive in California. People going through divorce often wind up getting their financial realities cut in 2 or in 3 because the professionals and the divorce process can take up so much finance. There are circumstances. Let's say you have a child with special needs. Let's say you have a house that's been actually built to allow wheelchair access or something like that for a child who has, you know, some sort of need for that. Then it gets to be much more critical. Do we really need to stay in the same domicile? Certainly people can be attached, especially if the home is exceedingly lovely and the family is going to take a financial hit from divorce. Yes, certainly. There are going to be some feelings, but children are often more flexible than the parents who are trying to defend their tender needs.
I think that's been a common experience for me.
Yeah.
Is, you know, parents, we go through all this stuff in my office about how we're going to tell the kids we're getting divorced and how we're going to tell the kids that we're moving. And a lot of times it seems like the kids are really focused on other things. They want to know where they're sleeping. They want to know, are they going to stay in the same
school? Right.
On the same soccer team,
Yeah.
or can they still play travel soccer? It seems like the kids, that when the parents report back to me after the moves take place, that the kids really kind of adapt very well. They have some things from home at mom's and some things from home at dad's, and it really doesn't seem to be as big a deal as the parents initially are concerned about.
I believe that's correct.
Have you got any suggestions for how parents can bring up the topic and make it a little less stressful for the kids, just discussing the move and what, you know, if that's, assuming the house is going to be sold?
The worst things that I've seen happen occur when parents are unwilling to even discuss this with the kids. When they hold back and they say they're trying to protect the children's tender sensibilities, and in good faith, sometimes that's the case. Whatever the parents telegraph to the kids is probably going to be the strongest determinant of how well they do. If the parents say it's going to be all right, that we're going to live in different places, it's going to be okay, you will adapt, you're going to be all right, the kids will often take their cue from that. At least that is what I've seen, and I've seen a lot of these.
I had a case once where this was the big thing. Two individuals had bought a house close to the beach in North County. We will never get a house like that again. That was the concern of both of them. And the children, they're going into junior high and high school, they can't be moved. And I suggested that they have the kids meet with, this was a co-mediation, it wasn't a collaborative case, but I suggested they meet with one of my collaborative colleagues, and the synopsis that came back is, we don't care where we live,
Exactly.
we don't care where we go to school, just stop mom and dad fighting.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. That was the response. I mean, I'm summarizing, but that
Yeah.
was the issue. And they've never asked, you know.
So I'd say maybe a tipping point is if you start to get outside of the school district, or you start to get outside of the circle of friends. Does that make it a little bit more challenging? I mean, I'm just thinking in my own case, not that we're divorced, but I'm thinking my wife would have a difficult time. Not only, again, I'm talking about my wife when we're thinking about the kids, but I mean the kids would also have a struggle. You know, they have a lot of friends in the neighborhood, a lot of friends in their small school, and so if they had a change location, again, I don't think the house is a big deal. I just think it's the circle of friends and the school that maybe has a bigger impact.
I wouldn't want to minimize that, but it just so happens we live in San Diego.
Yeah.
This is a military town. I mean, these families move every few years. These, you know, by and large, the kids do fine. I think that the destructive aspect of the marital conflict is so much more severe and has so much more impact on the kids than whether they're going to be in the same house or not. That's just how it's appeared to me over time.
Sure.
Yeah, it seems to me to make a big difference too on how old the kids are. Like, 3, 4, 5-year-olds aren't going to know the difference really much, right? Their center focus is their parents. Their primary attachment is to their siblings and their parents. But I can see the high school kids having a really hard time moving in the middle of high school, or something like that. Like Eric said, if they go outside the school district.
Yes.
So I would imagine that
It's harder.
Yeah.
But as Mark said, when you ask the kids, they'll choose the move to get the parents to stop squabbling because that's so painful for them.
Well, I have a question kind of along the same lines for Mark, maybe. I mean, where you see people that are so committed to keeping the home to where it comes to a financial strain because, again, trying to keep the kids and trying to keep everything. I mean, I would say from a financial perspective, taking out the emotional side of it, hey, get rid of the house and make a smart financial choice. But is it okay when people don't make that smart financial choice just to, keep things in line with their kids staying in the same area?
We see this all the time. This is very, very common that we get this kind of situation. I think what I've seen happen is that people have a tendency to just fear change anyway.
Sure.
So there's a natural resistance to the idea of we're going to have to move. And the last time I moved, I swore it would be the last time, and I swore that the time before. So no one enjoys moving. I think that's something we can be clear on. What tends to happen in divorce is people look for equity. In other words, I want my fair share of the pie. I want to get my half. I don't want to feel like I got ripped off in this. And equity can be achieved in many ways. You can take a real estate asset and take liquid assets, stock and bond investments, retirement accounts, and even though we're not comparing apples to apples, we can certainly assist with a division that both sides will probably perceive as being fair. Although that's a word I don't like, it's because fairness is kind of like beauty, it's in the eye of the beholder. But what we can do is then take what the couple are considering and spreadsheet it out and say, okay, well, if you did keep the house, and you did get the pension, this is what your circumstance, and then you rent and then you buy. We can build all this into the spreadsheet and give an indication of what the decisions that are being made today around the split look like 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And that I find people find compelling. I can't tell you how many people have said, yes, I must have the house, until they realize that 10 years down the road, when the kids go off to college and they lose that child support piece of the pie, they're going to be tearing up floorboards to keep the place warm in the the winter. And so I think the focus being a little bit more on the results of the split as opposed to just being on the split avoids a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I think that, people always come into my office because I do mostly mediation, some collaborative divorce, and at least one of them always has a plan in mind, right?
Yeah.
Plan A.
Yep.
And it's a process. So as you fill out the budget forms and you fill out all the financial forms and you start thinking about plan A and is it going to work, sometimes it becomes self-evident that plan A is not going to work. Sometimes it works and we're all good to go, but sometimes plan B has to be considered. And I think you just have to give people some room to move in that space and come to the realization that it may work and it may not. And so I just say to the people that are considering that, to give yourself the time to look at all the information that's really important and to know what your goals are for this year and next year and 10 years from now. And then just let the information kind of come together.
And be open to other solutions.
Be open to other solutions, because
just having an open mind is really critical.
the usual thing is...
But that's so contrary to the condition that these people are in.
Right.
They're in a condition of fear and anxiety. I've had 2 cases where people decided to do what's called nesting. The kids were gonna stay in the house and the parents were gonna come and go, and they rented a separate apartment in order to keep the kids in the house. This worked horribly in both of these circumstances. I've heard that people can do this.
I've seen it happen once.
One time?
One time. They pulled it off for a whole year.
Well, exactly. They
Yeah.
pulled it off for a whole year.
They pulled it off for a year, but that was
That's-
their goal. That was their goal, was to get this one
I
child to
see.
the end of the school year.
I see.
They wanted the divorce pretty much all done before they told the kids that, you know, they were going to be moving and all this stuff, and that they'd be going back and forth between two houses. So I saw them pull it off for a year, but I agree with you. Nesting is very rarely
That's
successful.
remarkable. I've never seen that.
Yeah, it's very rarely
But it's interesting, that
successful.
was
But
the
it's
goal, to
coming
do it
back in
for a
vogue.
year. I mean, to do that over a period of longer time, like, you know, how are you going to do that?
So, you know, nesting was a big thing when I first started practicing divorce law
Yeah.
22 years ago. And it fell out of favor shortly after I started practicing, because there were so many complaints and it was back in court, and the judges were like, yeah, no, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
But it's back in vogue. I mean, I've got people coming in all the time saying, well, what about this nesting thing? So it's kind of a tricky thing. So we do have a question from Ryan. Wants to know if there's any key phrases that you would suggest using when you bring up the move to help with the kids, to help kind of keep things productive and not have it fall down the cracks.
Key phrases. I would say key attitudes, more likely. That, again, as I don't remember who one of us said earlier, that to let the children know that it's going to be okay either way. Wherever you live, you're going to have us there. Where the parents are is where home is. We're going to work this out. We're going to manage this. If the parents are highly anxious and unconfident, the kids will be that way too. I think the kids will basically follow the parents' mood. So as far as key phrases, I guess that would depend on what the phrase, you know, how you speak around your own home. But it's the attitude, I think, that really matters. Any anxiety, any extra sort of tension that you bring to it, the kids are going to absorb that and reflect it.
All right, great. So one of the questions that we got earlier online was about, you know, what does the court do with the house? And so basically, you know, from a legal standpoint, you know, you've got a limited number of choices. You're either going to sell the house and split the proceeds in some way. One of you is going to buy the other one out, or you may own it together for some period of time until you decide to sell it. So the easiest thing probably is to sell the house and split the proceeds, but not everybody wants to do that way. If you can't agree on doing something else with the house, then the court is going to order the house to be sold. If one of you says, you know, I want to buy, you know, the other person out, they'll give you a limited number of days, months, you know, 60 to 90 days to get a new loan to buy the other person out. But if you don't, then they're going to put the house on the market. The court doesn't want you coming back over and over every 6 months, every year, trying to deal with this house issue. They want to get your case over and they want to get it done with. If you're in mediation, if you're in a collaborative divorce setting, then you have a lot more freedom to make choices about how you want to handle the marital residence. So if you decide you want to buy each other out, but you don't insist on getting a new loan, you know, in 6 months or in 60 days or even in 2 years, that can be written into the agreement. If you want to own the house for a while together and then put all the circumstances under which it would be sold into your marital settlement agreement, you can do that too. That's probably the most complicated thing for people to do. Is to own it together for some period of time, because it's very difficult to come up with all the possible contingencies of what could happen down the road, you know, that might affect the sale. You know, what if, you know, the person who's living in the house puts in new carpet? Do they get reimbursed for that? You know, what happens if somebody remarries? So a lot of that stuff can be built in, but you can't really determine all of it. We did a lot of that during the recession, where people's homes were upside down, and so we were, you know, maintaining the residence with some kind of co-ownership for some period of time.
You know,
See it a lot less now.
There's one thing that people don't always think about, which is that if one of you keeps that marital residence, is that you inherit the cost basis for that property. And people don't usually understand. Whenever, I will tell you, 90% of people, have asked them what their basis is in the property, they tell me how much they owe. And the basis is not that. It's what you paid for the property, and that basis is increased by investments in the property. Not maintenance, but if you put, you know, a new bathroom in or you put a pool in, that's an investment. New roof is not, it's maintenance. So if you've kept receipts, you build that up, but you have a number. And if you keep the house in the divorce and offset it for other assets, that now becomes your basis. As a married couple, under current tax law, you can exclude $500,000 of gain from capital gains tax. If you're a single individual, you can only exclude $250,000. So many people don't think, oh gosh, we've got all this equity, and yes, I'm going to get that equity, but when the kids go to college, I'm going to have to sell the house, and if I'm not married, I'm only going to get half the tax break. And so that's something that really needs to be sort of talked about in the process, because if you don't, it can be a shocker down the road. There is one caveat to that. If you purchased a house before the house you're in before 1998, your basis is not what you paid for it if you owned a previous home, because we used to roll over capital gains. So go back and look at your tax return the year that you bought it, and it should have the document there showing what your basis is in the property.
Yeah, so I mean, and that applies to a lot of different assets, whether you're splitting up an investment account with stock that has different basis and all of that stuff. I was just working on a case this week where that, that came up. So it is worth it, just everybody out there, to talk to your accountant and take some of these issues into account when you are dividing assets, to make sure that you understand what you're doing and what the tax implications of all that stuff is going to be, because it can be pretty serious. Now, of course, if you get the house and you get the cost basis and you get married again before you sell the house, then you're good to go, yeah?
Exactly. You can
So, but if you're going to be single for the rest of your life because you've now sworn off marriage, then you have to take that into consideration.
Right. And you have to take into consideration the fact that tax laws may change.
Yep.
This is a wonderful windfall for real property owners, but we didn't used to have this. We used to only be able to exclude $125,000 from gain one time in a lifetime. So tax laws can change.
Yeah. Absolutely.
The other issue that comes up with the house is the property tax basis.
Yeah.
So maybe you can address that for people. You or Eric, either one.
Yeah, Eric, jump away.
So, I mean, the property tax basis doesn't shift, right, in a divorce situation. I mean, maybe where property tax comes into importance is when you're dealing with clients that are over 55.
Right.
Right. So you can, one of the individuals can take that tax base and move it over to another property that they purchase. Now, only one of the spouses can take that, that tax basis and move it over. And there's, I think there's like 7 counties in the state of California where you can move the basis to, but typically, it's when you're moving it within San Diego. I'd have to go back and look at the specifics of it, because there's quite a checklist there to make sure you're eligible for it. But yeah, I mean, if you bought a home, in 2000 for, $500,000, and the thing's worth now $1.2 million, you're paying taxes on that low cost basis. And if you're over 55, it's pretty important with the price of homes today to be able to carry that basis over.
But you raise a really interesting point, or an important point, because this should be discussed during the divorce,
Right.
as opposed to dealt with after the divorce,
Right.
when you can't change anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's not dealt with in the marital settlement agreement as part of the divorce, then my understanding is the first person who claims it gets
Exactly, yes.
So
That's why you need to discuss
You
it.
really
Yeah.
want to have it in the divorce agreement so
Yeah.
that it's clear if you've got parties that are over the age of 55. And let's hope they don't change the whole tax thing again.
Yeah.
They just did that to us
I
last
know.
year, which has caused us all kinds of fun in
Looks
divorce
like we have
world
a
this year.
new question here.
All right, well, I can't see it because Claire's in the way. All right. So it looks like Lucci says, when we bought our house right after we got married, I put $40,000 more in cash than he did. What happens to that? Great question. Mark, that's for you.
Yeah, well, if you have good records and you can prove it, those funds should return to you. Again, you don't get, say you bought a house for $500,000, we'll use your example, and you put $40,000 more down than your spouse did during that, you get that $40,000 back, but you don't get an additional amount of the appreciation. You just get the 40 back. So yes, but again, you need to have paperwork. You need to have, because if you can't prove and trace it, then, and your spouse challenges it, it would be a crapshoot as to what the court might decide. So.
Or if you can both agree.
Yes.
So
of
that
course,
happens
yeah.
in
Yeah.
mediation and collaborative
Yeah,
divorce
all the
all the
time.
time. Well,
Yeah.
the parties
Yeah.
say, oh yeah, she put down 40, I put down 20. So she'd get her 40 back, he'd get his 20 back, and the rest of it would,
And the appreciation would be
and,
split.
yeah,
Yeah.
the rest of it would go
Yeah,
into
good
community
question, yeah.
property. So that's a great question. So you kind of talked about capital gains. We've kind of talked about can you afford to keep the house or not?
Right.
But sometimes what comes up in my cases is can you afford to move?
Mm-hmm.
So what's the analysis you do with that one?
Well, you know, it's a horrible thing to have to turn to a couple and say, well, frankly, you just can't afford to get divorced, because, you know, it's amazing how many people live right up until their every penny of income they earn, and it obviously costs more when you have two houses. So there is the nesting opportunity, which we've already discussed, which is fraught with problems, and by the way, I have never seen work either. And I've seen two people try it. They didn't get to a year. Neither one of them got beyond about 3 or 4 months, if I recall correctly. If you can't afford the house, then there has to be pretty serious look at the finances. And again, it's the projections that we run that can determine what is affordable and what is not. Sometimes I've had couples actually decide that they can't afford to stay in Southern California and have relocated together but separately to another place so they could continue to co-parent, but at the same time be in a real estate market that was within their range.
Yeah. So let's say they've decided one person's going to buy the other person out, and let's say for the sake of this discussion that the wife's going to stay in the house, she's going to buy husband out. Wife has been a stay-at-home mom, and Eric, I'm aiming this one for you.
Sure.
Wife's been a stay-at-home mom. She's recently gone back to work. How does she qualify for a refi so that she can get the money to buy husband out, assuming there's not enough assets everywhere else? What are the requirements?
Yeah, so I would say that hopefully the theme that people are hearing here in their big take-home that I always tell people is, you know, have these conversations sooner rather than later in the divorce process. You know, and the one thing I'll touch on that doesn't necessarily directly answer your question is that I always tell people, let's just check your credit. You know, no sense in having, you know, one time I talked to a client for an hour over the phone, just listen to the whole story, get to the point of, okay, well, let's see if we can do this. First thing we do is check the credit, and it's game over, you know, because the credit's not in a position to qualify for financing, and there wasn't going to be anything we could do to rehabilitate the credit to get it into a position for financing. So, number one, checking the credit right away, right, because that can, you know, solve the problem right then and there. But let's say that the credit's good and there is a position to qualify. So number one, to address the employment situation, because you do have a lot of women that are getting back into the workforce that have been staying at home. That would be my wife in this in our situation. For your income to be considered on the application to qualify when you're working, you have to have been on the job for 2 years and in the same line of work. Otherwise, if you've only been on the job for a year or 18 months, unfortunately, we cannot use that income to help you qualify, so we'd have to wait. So a lot of times where, you know, we get brought into the picture is, you know, seeing if there's employment income there that can be used or not, and if it can be or can't be, is the employment income enough to help them qualify? And if employment income's not enough, and they're going to be receiving child support, you know, and or say spousal support, you know, then we start to work with them on two things. One, how much does that support amount need to be, right? And it's very different from the type of loan that they're qualifying for. And I don't want to get too technical, but you know, if you're qualifying for a jumbo loan, you know, which means that your loan amount that you're borrowing is over $649,750 today, which that amount changes every year. You know, it could be a higher amount that you need in support versus if you're qualifying for a non-jumbo loan versus an FHA loan versus a VA loan. So it's very loan type specific, which is critical. And then we can help them set, hey, does it need to be $2,000 or does it need to be $3,000? And then in addition to how much it is, you know, lenders want to see that you've received it for a certain period of time. You know, so typically they want to see that you've received the support for 6 months, and then once you've received it for 6 months, assuming that the divorce, you got a final judgment, you are then eligible for financing with most lenders. that they want to see that it's going to continue for 3 more years. And so, again, getting somebody like myself into the conversation sooner rather than later, they can help guide you on how much does that amount need to be and how long do you need to be receiving it for based on the specific type of loan that you're trying to qualify for. Because, again, how long you need to receive it and how long it needs to continue for shifts based on the different type of loan that you're qualifying for also. So for somebody that's receiving support, that's the biggest value that somebody like myself can bring. And again, a lot of the cases we're involved in are mediation cases, so it's good, because if you have typically people in a mediation, they're usually a little bit more amicable than not, and you can maybe get some flexibility from the other side to be flexible on how they structure the support so that the wife can keep the home.
So we were talking before we started here that some people come and they say, can't I just have the bank take my husband off the loan?
Yeah.
Can you address that for a minute?
Yeah, so I was talking to a client yesterday on this, as a matter of fact. Because the one challenge that you do see in lending today when somebody's trying to, buy out a spouse is they have this great 30-year fixed rate at 3.5%, and now rates are pushing the high 4s to 5%. And so not only are you stepping up in payment because you're taking money out to buy the other half out, but you're also stepping up in the payment because the rates are so high. So a lot of times people are like, hey, I just want to get them off the loan. Do I have to do a refinance? I heard this word that I can maybe do an assumption, a loan assumption, which means you just assume the terms of that loan. Well, number one, you got to go back into the loan documents that you probably don't have and read through those to see if your loan is assumable, because most loans today are not assumable. Years back they were, but most of them today are not. And so what do you do in that case? Because you don't have the loan documents, you pick up the phone, you call the bank who you're making your payments to, the servicer, and say, hey, is my loan assumable? And the only thing that I'll say is whoever you talk to, hang up, call back 10 times and make sure you hear 10 yeses. No disrespect to the customer service reps that are at those servicers, they just typically don't have the right answers a lot of times. But if you hear 10 yeses, then give it a shot. Typically, if you go in to assume the loan, they're going to want to see your income documentation and see that you can afford it on your own.
When did assumable loans go out of fashion?
I don't have the exact year, to be honest with you, but I would say it's been about 15 to 20 years ago. I mean,
Okay. The turn of the
It was still a thing when I started practicing 22 years ago.
Yeah, okay.
We didn't worry about refis. We just, people either assumed the loan or the MSA said, wife's staying in the house, she's going to take over the loan, is going to assume, pay, hold harmless, indemnify, blah, blah, blah. And then husband didn't have a problem going out and getting a new loan. They could waive the MSA in front of the lender, and the lender would say, oh yeah, wife's going to pay off that loan, even though your name's still on it, here's your new loan. How does that fly today?
So that still flies. It's called a contingent liability. So, you got joint debts. You got a house, you got 2 cars, 4 credit cards. The MSA says wife gets the house, wife gets 1 car, wife gets 2 credit cards, husband gets 1 car and 2 credit cards. As soon as that MSA's, and again, we can get technical on the timing of it all, but let's just say that when the final judgment's issued, husband goes to pull his credit the next day to buy a house. We see a house, 2 cars, 4 credit cards on his credit report. We pull out his MSA. It says the wife got the house, the 1 car, and the 2 credit cards. As much as they show on the credit, we put a 0 and act like they're not there. So we just count against him the 1 car and the 2 credit cards. So it makes it easier for them to qualify. And it's not like that the wife's had to made payments on the mortgage for 12 months. No, it's instant. Now, again, I would say most lenders operate that way. I've had one client where they had 10 properties, she got 7, he got 3, she came to us, we refinanced all 7, he went to a local credit union and they said, hey, you don't qualify, you got all 10 of these. He's like, I get it, but she got those 7, they didn't care. So I'd say unlikely you'll run into that, but you could. But most lenders are going to follow, as soon as you have the final judgment, will follow the debts that are awarded to you in the MSA.
So sometimes we get a case where the clients are literally really trying to work together and say husband's going to move out and will rent for the next few years. Wife is going to keep the home and she's going to get it in the settlement, but he's like, well, I'll just let her, I don't need to finance a property, I'll let the mortgage still stay in both names. Mm-hmm. What are the pitfalls and risks with doing that?
Yeah, pitfalls and biggest risks are the wife misses a mortgage payment. You know, because as soon as the wife misses a mortgage payment, that's going to fall on his credit because he's still on the loan.
Yeah, but he says, like, wait a minute, it's in the MSA. She has to make the mortgage payment.
Yeah, so great point. As much as it's awarded to the wife in the MSA as well as that car and those 2 credit cards, it's still a joint debt that does not relinquish your liability from the debt. You know,
The bank will still come after
it's
you.
absolutely 100%.
So you can qualify for a loan on a new house, but if she doesn't pay off the car, she doesn't pay off the credit card, she doesn't pay off the house, you're
Pay 'em
still on the
time.
hook.
Yep, yep.
Now with the house, they're probably going to foreclose on it. How likely are they to actually come after you, assuming there's plenty of equity in the house to pay off the debt?
No,
It's going to ding your credit.
Yeah,
That's the risk. Yeah.
yeah.
You know.
I mean,
Well, and also,
Go
this is a
ahead.
legal thing, but wouldn't then the husband have a claim against the wife?
Yeah, so I mean, we go through this
yeah.
all the time,
Yeah.
you know, in these cases that the MSA is a judgment signed by the judge, becomes a court order, says, as between the two of you, the husband and the wife, husband, wife, and wife, this is who's going to pay what. The MSA can't extinguish your contractual relationship with the lender that you have a contract with, whether it's the bank on the house or it's the credit card or it's, you know, Toyota who's got the loan on your car. So they still can come after whoever's name is on that loan if that person doesn't pay it off. So let's say wife has the car, the loan was in husband's name for whatever reason, she keeps the car, the MSA says she's going to pay off the loan stays in husband's name, she doesn't pay it off, he ends up they repossess the car, can't sell it for enough money to pay it off, he ends up on the hook for $3,000 or $4,000 to pay off this car, and they actually come after him. He has to go back after wife and family court. So it's to be avoided if possible.
Yeah.
You know, pay off the credit cards, change the name of the car loan. People have more or less success with that, depending on who holds the car loan. If it's credit union, it's usually pretty easy. Some of the other lenders aren't so nice, but you still are on the hook with the person that you signed the contract with. We can't terminate that contractual relationship.
I have a very high-level comment I make. Have as few encumbrances and interactions with your ex-spouse as possible after the divorce. Because everybody, we could co-own that and we can work in the business together. It's like, really you want to separate. And Scott, perhaps you can talk to this as much as you can in most cases.
Don't need to say more. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All those good intentions then meet circumstances when somebody's angry because they introduced the children to a new man friend or new woman friend. There's all these things that happen downriver, and
It throws a monkey into the works.
Something like
Shall we
that.
say that? Yeah. So it really sounds like the longer that people can plan, the better.
Yeah.
If they can talk to somebody like Eric, get a hold of somebody like Mark who can help them do a lot of financial planning, and then they can take some time to maybe set this stuff up. You know, get the person working, get the support being paid, because sometimes the person who's paying support isn't willing to really start paying it right now until they realize that it can really help move things along later. So getting that kind of stuff.
Our average time with a client is 6 to 12 months, where you would think it's just 30 days to get a loan done. No, there's a lot of planning, you know, and a lot of things changing throughout the process that we need to be kept in the loop on to readjust the numbers so things can get done.
All right.
And as my dear departed father used to say, nobody ever plans to fail, they just fail to plan.
Yeah, that's right.
So thanks for everybody being with us today. Thanks for those of you who brought in live questions, Lucia and Ryan. I want to thank our guests today, Scott Weiner and Eric Billick. And of course, Mark Hill and I are here every month. Our next show is September 11th. Nobody will forget that date. And we're going to be talking about child and spousal support next month. So if you want to log into our Facebook Live page and send in your questions in advance, feel free to do that. Also, the next divorce options class will be Saturday, September 1st from 9 to 12. At 11622 El Camino Real. That's a 3-hour class where we have an attorney, a therapist, and a financial specialist that answer all of your questions about divorce. So if you'd like to join us on that, please log on to the Collaborative Family Law San Diego web page, which is collaborativefamilylawsandiego.com, and you can register there. You can usually also find that class on Meetup and on Craigslist.